Asian representation is hard to find in books, but it's important for kids to have good role models. Someone who looks and thinks just like you and shares your cultural values can be hard to find as a racial minority when you're reading mainstream books like Harry Potter or Percy Jackson. So, how can kids get the representation they deserve? Well, if you look hard enough, you can find good books that have Asian protagonists. So I'll be introducing my favorite books that feature Asian representation. So I have four books today actually, about Asian American and Asian culture. So we're looking for representation in these books, which means we are going to be looking at books that have Asians or Asian Americans as their main characters. So the first book that I'll be talking about is Band Book Club by Kim Hyun-suk, Go Young-ju, and Ryan Estrada. So this is a graphic novel, and it's just got great historical basis. First of all, I recommend this to anybody who wants to find out more about what Korea was like in specifically 1983 and during the Fifth Republic. So this book is about the anti-dictatorship sentiments that people take and anti-censorship stances specifically. So the government was super against free speech back in 1983 in Korea. So this girl immigrates to the US and goes to university, and she's basically fighting against the corrupt system that Korea had in place at the time. And it's really interesting, and the illustrations are beautifully engaging and stylistic. And it's just a really good book, and I'd recommend it strongly for anybody, not just Asians, but also any non-Asians who want to get a look into Korean history. And my second book is American Born Chinese. This one is another graphic novel. This one's by Jin-Wen Yang, and it's basically about three different characters and three different stories. One is the mythological story of the Monkey King, who is a Chinese figure in basically old Chinese folklore. And then there's also this boy named Danny, and Danny's cousin has come from China, and his cousin's name is Chin Ki, and Chin is basically a huge Chinese stereotype. He's a walking Chinese stereotype, and Danny is embarrassed to be seen with him because being seen with Chin has led Danny to experience racism firsthand, and he doesn't like that. So there's that, Danny, the Monkey King, and there's Jin Wang, who is a sweet Chinese American boy who is really just, his number one goal is to fit into his new school where he is the only Chinese American. So these three stories are woven together really well by the author, and there's this plot twist at the end that really had me surprised. Though I can't say anything, just overall this book is really well written, and I actually recommend it to upper grades rather than lower grades just because of the content and the way it might be difficult for lower grades to understand, but it's not an inappropriate book. So I strongly recommend American Born Chinese as well. And then we have The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. This is actually the book that comes to most people's minds when we talk about Asian or Asian American literature. So this takes place in San Francisco in 1949. So it's actually a historical novel, but when I was reading this book, it didn't feel historical at all to me because the focus was more on the relationships between the very Asian mothers and the more Americanized daughters. So this was something that I could personally really relate to, and I'm sure kids at DIS can also relate to this, as our parents are generally very traditionally East Asian. They have the Confucian, ideals of you need to study and you need to work hard to do these things, while we're more Americanized and in general we're young, so we want to have fun. It just really dives into the differences between our parents and us as generations, and also how we're defined culturally. And this book is it does an incredible job at exploring the relationships socially as well. It's just beautifully built, and there's great historical context. So it doesn't feel dated, but you can definitely see the historical influences. And overall, just another amazing book that I'd really recommend for actually not just Asians. Again, this is just a good book overall. So I'd recommend this to anybody who just wants to have a good time in an engrossing book. And my last book is aimed more for lower grade audiences. This is Millicent Min, Girl Genius, and this is by another Chinese American author. Her name is Lisa Yi, and this is about a girl genius named Millicent Min, and she's Chinese American, and she's just really smart. So she's 11 years old, but she goes to high school, and in general, she's got a really high IQ, she works really hard, her parents push her to do all these things. If you can relate to, sort of being that kid, then this book might be for you. But besides that, even if you're not that kid, this book is very engaging and comedic overall. And this book is just really good and really funny, and I'd recommend it to lower grades, maybe 3rd to 5th graders who want a nice, fun, lighthearted read. This is for you, Millicent Min. So those were my book recommendations for anyone who's looking for Asian American representation in literature. And even if you're not Asian or Asian American, I would strongly recommend that you check out any of these books because, they can be informative, they can be funny, or they can just be really well-written books overall. So it's really hard to find books that have characters that represent you, especially so when you're a racial minority. So I hope these recommendations were of help to any kid that's maybe been struggling with finding a character that really feels like them. And that's it for representation in reading today. Thank you!